Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on a myth that is persistent in African American cultures that I was indoctrinated to believe and think, and had my mind since changed since I've had have taken a genetic um, test provided by 23andMe. I'm not saying that this test is conclusive, and not that any of these genetic tests don't have statistical or some scientific problems with them, but we do know that they are at least reliable to a measure of about zero point 0.3, which is honestly better than many other psychometric batteries that you will not actually find. And it's not a psychometric battery, but I mean to say that it is a test to determine, it's a scientific institute assessed to determine things, and reliability in terms of its makeup is about average. So it's not amazing. It's not even as reliable as IQ, but it is not completely unfounded or non-reproducible. And in fact, when you look at statistics across the different organizations that do this genetic ancestry testing, you do find that the numbers for various groups stay very consistent, though you do find each group using different statistical methods and modes of reasoning. Some are more geographically based, though all, it seems, genetic tests are most assuredly, from a theoretical standpoint, geographically based. With that said, the reason I want to attack this myth is because one thing that was extremely shocking to me is that I knew that I was somewhat European, but what was most surprising was how European I am in my genes, given the fact that both, I'm not really sure who my father is, but my mother and my grandmother always indicated that I had a reason to believe that they were black. Whenever I look at my genes, that may be true, but they couldn't have been all black. And the thing that was even more so true is that, well, I have a great grandfather who was most likely British or Irish, which is great. So I think about 3 generations prior to mine, which is due to slavery, the institution of slavery, most likely. Which I'm going to get to that fact later on. So I don't know what people think of me phenotypically. When people look at me, I think that they just assume I'm well, let's talk about African Americans in general. So it's not going to be about me, but it's through my own personal experience that I'm realizing generally that there's a problem with what people think about African Americans. And I'm only going to talk about one myth, and this is a myth particular to the African American community. So when most people think about their African ancestry, they think that they're slaves that come from sub-Saharan Africa, or East the Ivory Coast, or something like that. Well, that's true. That's empirically accurate. But when another thing that many black people believe is that they have Native American. Now, why do black people believe that? Well, because even like my hair, it's curly, but then it's straight at the it's curly and kind of wavy, but then it's straight at the same time at the roots. I have high cheekbones. Um, I have um, I have certain features, and I don't have a big nose. And so it's the case that people tend to think that these features are clear indication, especially the higher and the sharper somebody's cheekbones get. They think these things are clear indicators of Native American ancestry, as well as long faces. There's a sort of basic phenotypic reasoning that goes on that's really misplaced. That's communicate that, well, somebody has to be Native American, and it's a myth that is as old, I think, as the 20s. And so it's very old. And I didn't know Chris Rock had a documentary on this. It wasn't until I've been doing more and more research and in terms of the genetic makeup of African Americans that I've learned all of these things. quite recently. So this isn't something that I just found out, but it is something I've found out. And it was so shocking that I wanted to talk to my grandmother about it, but my grandmother, being who she was not open to it at all and had so many different things to say that were very prejudicial. So you can imagine that did not make me feel well. So that did not make me feel good. In fact, it was very, very disappointing to see how closed-minded my grandmother was to the truth of this, that only about 2.8% of my genes are East Asian, which I don't even know if that's necessarily Native American. In fact, that's Inuit. So that's closer to Inuit people. So Alaskan kind, the Inuit people. So not necessarily what you would consider as centralized to America. And that's one of the oldest ancestors I have, period. So I have ancestors that migrated out of Africa and down, uh, went there. I'm more closely related to Arctic or Inuit people than I am a Native American, and even them, I'm not really related to them very much at all. So, I'm mostly sub-Saharan African, 61.8%. I just say 62%. Guess what the rest of me is? Guess what the rest of me is? It's European, British, Irish, which I said, Scandinavian, and German. So I mean, trust me, being raised Afrocentric and everything like that, that was just a hard thing for me to deal with. Not because I dislike white people or anything like that. And so I've said that in other videos and everything like that. I like white people. I mean, like, I've been drawn to European culture since I was a very young child, being exposed to it in various ways by my grandfather and things like that. But I mean, and I was raised around white and Asian people and things like that. But I would have just never assumed that I was anything European, really, to any strong extent. My grandmother alluded to the fact that it would be the case that in my genes and in the genes of all Black people, that we should see some small amount of European, because the white man, as she puts it, raped and pillaged the world, and so his DNA is his wicked DNA is all across the landscape. And it is true to some extent that that narrative is cogent and important to history. Not saying that all white people were rapists or something like that, but the reason why I have a great 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 grandfather who is Anglican is because of slavery and rape. So most likely, or rape or coerced sex. I don't even know if it was. So I don't know. So I just know genes were traded. But so why do we have this myth in the African American community? The reason why we have the myth in the African American community is, I think, for two reasons: ignorance. Whenever you're looking at even these genetic testing sites, they don't have as much data from Black people as they do European people of European ancestry. In fact, like, I think a majority of the people who take these genetic tests are of European ancestry. I just got it because, well, one, I don't know much about myself from a historical standpoint, so I know just basically all my knowledge about myself is stops with my grandmother from a historical standpoint. So the African, but I've always been a weird person and things like that. I'm not saying my genes are what make me weird or anything, like, not necessarily, not in the ways that I mean I'm weird, but just I needed to know, because I mean, I knew I couldn't really trust my mother, and I also knew that I didn't know the whole story, and that's just what I knew I didn't know. I don't know the whole story. I just know what I've been told, and I never like to stick with what I've been told, which actually has got me in more trouble, and it actually made my grandmother a little estranged towards me and treats me a little weird now because, well, I'm compromised per se, but it's the case. I still love her and respect her and things like that, but she does have some pretty messed up ideas. So yeah, and so, but I think that ignorance is big deal because that was what really characterized my belief in certain things. I thought, I'm Native American and things like that, but I'm not. Not at all. I'm something of an indigenous person, but not to the Americas. um, and um, also, I think it's the case because of black nationalism or Afrocentrism. I think that that's a thing too because of the the darker side. I don't want to use darker. I don't like that analogy. What I should say is the more problematic sides of black nationalism or Afrocentrism. Black nationalism and Afrocentrism is a prejudice, or at least it has prejudicial roots. And it has prejudicial roots because it evolved within a racially discriminatory society, and because it was trying to combat the prejudice of, well, the European ancestry, the people of European and Anglican ancestry in America, because it's not like America wasn't racist or something like that. But because this is the case, and this is the reason for the evolution of the ethical framework in the first place, slavery, basically, and trying to remedy the African American psyche since the disillusionment of slavery, is the case that Afrocentrism and Black nationalism emerged, and those ideas still are prominent within Black culture. It's why you have groups like Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not the same thing as the Black Panther Party or anything like that, but trust me, Black Lives Matter is not the first emergence of. It's a lot different now because of different times and things like that, but the philosophical and ideational framework is not very different. I'm not and I've said in other videos and everything like that that I'm not Afrocentric or black nationalist because, well, I think that would be very hypocritical of myself. I think it'd be very hypocritical. So I would never accept those doctrines of belief, but I think that that's part of the reason because the underneath the idea that black is beautiful is, for many, is the idea that white is evil. And so that's why I think that's in there, why it's a consistent myth as well. I also think that so we have ignorance in Afrocentrism and Black nationalism, and then we have it's difficult to make out why or understand. So it's complicated because it's not complicated in terms of there was slavery and slave owners had sex with their slaves and raped and things like that. So I don't know. So I mean, I don't know the details or anything like that. I know rape was a big part of it, and sexual coercion, rape and sexual coercion. I don't know if there's anything else or anything like that. I don't really know, just because I don't know the situation because I can't look back into history. I'd say that that's probably a majority of the cases, but that's probably not all the cases because the more I study anthropology, it's the case that human beings are very interesting animals, and we've been trading genes with one another for a very, very long time. In fact, the Scandinavian in me is very old. It's a Viking. It's not like, well, I'd put it like that. Well, I don't know if I got that from my great grandfather or anything like that. So I'm 39 point. Well, I'm 39% European. If I round the numbers up, that's I'm 60. If I'm rounding, I'm 62% African, and 38% European. But if I'm sticking with the numbers as they are, I'm 61 and 39. That's not actually super uncommon, but that is a little high. So What I found out through my studies is that on average, black people are going to have anywhere from 12% to 20% European ancestry in them. So it's like, what the hell, man? Like, first, I don't know if most black people know that. Next, they're only going to find 2 to 10% Native American in them, which, is not surprising. So those results tend to be consistent. You have it with the case of they have lower numbers depending on which company you use, whether you're talking about Ancestry.com or 23andMe or the various genetic sites. But it's the case that these numbers tend to stay consistent across, the deals. I'm high in my European ancestry for somebody who's supposedly just black. You don't know how embarrassing that was how embarrassing that was for me and everything like that. Now, I think because it's obvious for people who are mulatto, things like that, because, well, man, like, look, man, I'm not mulatto, okay? I don't know what I am, well, I know what I am now, but growing up as a kid, I don't know what I am. I know I'm not mulatto. Um, People asked me at various points whether I was and things like that, and people tried to hint to me that they think I'm. So at one point in time, people thought I was Puerto Rican, and that's when I was living in New York. I'm not Puerto Rican. I don't have any kind of Latin American or Latino in me whatsoever. It's all European and a smidge of East Asian. So a very small amount, but I'm East Asian to some extent. I mean, maybe that's why I like shamanism and things like that. I don't know. That was probably wrong to say, but I mean, just being funny. I'm being cheeky about myself. Not really. That wasn't to be a shot to other people or something like that. But yeah. So you have to imagine that this was really, really embarrassing. Now, I'm not proud of these things, and I'm not necessarily happy about these things. 'Cause my grandmother does not take it well, which was very disappointing to me. It was very disappointing to me. It's also the case that it's going to be something that's rather confusing to square away with. So now I think that I have to study European. So I've always studied world history and things like that, but I'm telling you, I don't study European history as closely as I studied African history because it was not my history. It's just a generally interesting history that I need to understand in order to understand Western philosophy. So I wanted to understand why Christianity was so prominent in Europe. I wanted to understand why Nietzsche thought what he thought. I wanted to understand why Carl Jung believed what they believed. I wanted to understand what motivated Yeats, what motivated Kant, what motivated Spinoza, what motivated I wanted to know the genealogy of ideas per se and the role history played on influencing the Western consciousness collectively and on the individual level. And so I looked into it, but now I'm going to look into it a lot more thoroughly because it's something that could be personally meaningful to me. And so I'm going to get to this in terms of my talk on my maturation as an individual. But one of the things that's been really helpful for me as an individual, not feeling so, um, I guess, estranged in life, is learning more about my ancestry because even if I don't mesh completely with the modern world per se, or my peers, even, it's the case that I do have a connection to the world from a social a social historical standpoint, which I think is satisfying to introverted sensing. I'm not really sure why it's satisfying to a certain extent. I mean, it's the case that it helps me. Information is always what's thinking and information. That's always what's helped me square away the awkwardness whenever I do experiment and do things. I get out in the world. I talk to people. I've expanded my group of friends and communications. I made it a point, being a strong introvert, to talk to strangers and just try hanging out with someone even though I don't know them well and I don't know where it's going to go and things like that. I adopted the exploratory aspect of my nature to the fullest extent that I could because it one was necessary for me because I was well, I'm gonna get to it. It's just a case that at a certain point in my maturation, that was very necessary for me. It's also the case that whenever I think about how I relate to the world broadly and socially, that this was very that studying more about the past of my ancestors and why the world looks the way that it does was extremely useful to me because, well, I'm somebody who prizes information and it allows me to feel more okay. I'm not really sure why it allows me to feel more okay with being an individual because I don't actually directly identify with it. I respect it, heed it, and need it to a certain extent. That's what I'd say. So whenever somebody asks me, if somebody ever does ask me or anything like that, or if anybody would ask me, I'm an African European American. I'm more one than the other, but I'm not like a small amount of the other either. You can't just blow it away. Look, I guess from a scientific perspective, because I'm trained in science, if you have it the case, like, look, if 38% of Americans just suddenly died, be a lot. That's a big deal. So when I learned that 38% of my genes come from Europeans, I think I'm not gonna be able to explain that one away. Like, that stopped. If it was like 2 or 5 or if it's 10, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. God. I mean, like, yeah, I laughed, but I wasn't laughing. Well, I was shocked more, so I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't laughing. I was shocked, and I'm laughing now, but because I thought, oh, what? Yeah. Whoa. I was like, oh, that's gonna be a tough one to square away. Wait, not that I had any prejudices per se, necessarily as myself personally, but I know I'm related to. So my sister, extremely prejudicial. Extremely prejudicial. My grandmother, extremely prejudicial. My mother is the least prejudicial of my immediate family. She's even admitted at various points in times that if she ever met a white man that was attracted to her and that she got along with, maybe she'd even marry them and have kids with them because she's still not sure if she doesn't want to stop having kids. She's thinking about getting her tubes undone because she talks about the joy of having children and things like that, I think. One, you should not have more kids, but two, I was kind of relieved to hear that because one thing I was very much so hounded for in my family is the fact that I'm not just attracted to black people. So I don't just like black women. I like black women. I'm not saying I don't. It's like, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying I'm not sexually attracted to black women. I very much so am. I'm not only sexually attracted to black women, which is this thing that really bothered people and made me feel guilty because I was raised Afrocentrically. So that's what I was taught, you know? It's like I was not supposed to come home with anybody else other than a black girl to my grandmother. And I changed her mind and things like that, partly because she just had to accept it whenever I brought home. So the first girlfriend I had was black. I'm not saying she wasn't. That didn't work out. The next girlfriend I had was mulatto. She was mixed. She was half white, half black. The next girlfriend I had was Middle Eastern. My grandmother was not too keen about that, but all the girlfriends I have had in my lifetime have pretty faces and are very sweet and nice. And so if I think somebody's attractive, it's because I like their face. I like their face. I like their body too. I mean, I judge women on their body and things like that, like any other person, male probably does. But it's really, I'm a face person. It's like face is, I can't, yeah. It's the face, man. It's the face. But so that's the deal. So I always dated girls with prettier faces than not. Though my girlfriends all were pretty from a general standpoint, which is also why I've gotten into some fights whenever I was younger because people then would try to talk to my girlfriends and like, hey, dude, back off. But anyways, yeah, so that was a thing. Anyways, so yeah, the third one was Middle Eastern, and then the fourth one was Latina. mostly Mexican American, but very light skinned. Um, and then my other girlfriend, so those are, then I stopped living in Houston, and then I moved to California, and then the first relationship I have with a person in California is a much older white woman, which one shocked and surprised me because I I mean, so I had a relationship with a much older white woman in Houston, so it shouldn't have shocked me that much. But she wasn't just white; she was Persian in white. So for me, it wasn't strange to me if other ethnic groups liked me per se because I'm an ethnic person. And I guess because I thought very narrowly of what ethnicity is as a kid, then it surprised me that somebody who is ethnically of European descent would find me attractive. I did not think that that would be a thing. Purely that, I did not think that that would be a thing, and definitely did. And so I had an affair with a woman that was nothing but European and much older than me, which surprised me because I was 19 at the time. She was 30. So that was a thing, and so I don't tell my grandmother those things because she'd probably disown me. And then after that, my next. So I've had a lot of different romantic affairs. I'm not gonna like say that I'm not a promiscuous person. I don't like to kiss and tell and things like that. I keep those things pretty much under wraps. But I will say, in terms of my just purely sexual affairs, I've slept with uh, Asian, Latina, and white women. And my most recent girlfriends have just recently been white, though after that one affair with the 30-year-old woman, I dated a black girl because though I realized that I did not like black popular culture in California, and so I just couldn't. It lasted like 2 weeks, and then I stayed single for a while, and then I dated a white girl, but that's just because I met her in my Calculus 3 class and she was attractive. And she was relatively intelligent and things like that, but then I realized there's differences in intelligence even in like those environments and things like that. I since changed, so every time I had a failed relationship, I updated my model of what I should be looking for and things like that because really, whenever I was very young, I was just controlled by my visual cortex. And so yeah, and so I learned. So I went, as maybe some people do, I thought I rely too much on my visual cortex. I need to base more things on personality, so like similarity and various things like that. I was reading psychological papers and things like that, so I thought I'm gonna go for a black girl that I think is physically attractive, as close to the same age as me, and who I think is relatively intelligent. But at that point in time in my life, I'm telling you, I was not looking for people as intelligent as me. Just not to sound arrogant or something like that, just because I knew it would be rare. Once I really faced up to the truth of IQ and things like that, I just knew it would be rare. So I wasn't necessarily looking for that. She just couldn't be dumb. So that's the thing. She just couldn't be dumb. That was my thing. And so yeah, and so that's what and so I went with. So yeah, I tried the black girl and didn't work. And so I thought, oh God, I need to stop being a bit more prejudicial. The girlfriend before, the one I have now, seemed very nice and things like that until I got to know her. And so I thought, I'm just going to do this purely off of personality and things like that. I'm throw all my prejudices to the wind and everything like that in terms of looks and everything. So if I'm going to give numbers and things like that, I'd say on average I would go for 8s, 7s, and 8s. Sometimes 9s and things like that because, well, so I'll put it like this: the Middle Eastern girl I dated was like a 9 or a 10. She was not exactly. She was very spoiled and entitled and things like that. And so I thought, usually very, 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 very beautiful people are going to be. That's not all that's going on with them per se. I'm not as crazy. I didn't have the right kind of crazy. She's the one that made me think of this philosophy that everybody's crazy and everybody has some extremes and things about them to varying degrees. It's just finding the right crazy that fits your crazy that you need to look for in a mate. And so I thought, this girl right here is probably the right kind of crazy. No, no, she wasn't. And then I met my girlfriend that I'm dating now, and she happens to be white. But it's, to me, very, like, I tried like so many different ways and things like that. And I feel kind of ashamed that I feel like I need to justify it, but this was pounded in my head so strongly, and I get looks and things like that from black women and things whenever they see me in certain settings with my girlfriend and things, and so it does bother me because I like black people. I'm just like black people. I just like I was raised with a certain kind of mindset and everything like that. So it just is like, trust me, it's not an easy thing for me. So, but I can't deny that I think my girlfriend is beautiful. I like her. I like her. She's very intelligent. She's very creative. We have way more in common than I haven't had in common with any other person in my life. She actually understands me. She's very open to who I am as a person and everything like that. And so it works. I mean, I get along with her so well. Well, it's hard for me not to value her, and she's freaking beautiful. To me, at least, like her eyes drive me freaking insane. And it's like those things matter to me per se as an individual, and so I'm satisfied. But I tell you that that's partly too why I guess all of this myth exists, because there is a real tragedy to the history, and there's a real disdain for some aspects of African history, and there is ignorance. So if you are African American, you probably should not believe that you're Native American, not until you test your genes. And so yeah, that's the reality. You're probably a lot more European than you know if you're African American. I mean, if you are African American from the standpoint that you have your ancestry is because you're here in America due to slavery, the history of slavery. That's probably the case for you. So, yeah, that's my video. Thank you for watching, and yeah.